Quick question. When was the last time you saw Jackie Jackson trending? Not the Jacksons the group, not a Jackson family scandal, not a tabloid headline. Jackie Jackson, the man. The oldest of the brothers, the one who started it all. Take your time, because if you're struggling to answer, you're not alone. Type his name into a search bar and you'll get old Jackson 5 footage, a Wikipedia stub, and maybe a blurry photo from a red carpet where he's standing 3 feet away from someone more famous. And here's what's strange about that. This is a man who was singing lead before Michael Jackson ever touched a microphone. A man who co-wrote one of the most iconic dance records of the 1980s. A man who, at 75 years old, just launched a luxury furniture company that's showing at design fairs in Milan. A man who stood in a room in Los Angeles this spring and watched his nephew become his little brother on a movie screen in front of the entire world. So why does it feel like nobody's talking about him? The answer isn't that Jackie Jackson disappeared. It's that he did something almost nobody in his family has managed to do. He got quiet on purpose. And in a family built on spectacle, a family where every sibling seems to have a chapter that reads like a thriller, quiet doesn't trend. Quiet doesn't get clipped for TikTok. Quiet doesn't make headlines. But quiet, it turns out, might be the smartest move anyone in that family ever made. Today, we're going to find out where Jackie Jackson actually went. Not the tabloid version, the real one. Stick around, because by the end of this, you might walk away thinking Jackie was the sibling who figured it out, while everyone else was still fighting for the spotlight. Before there was a Michael Jackson, there was a Jackie Jackson. Born Sigmund Esco Jackson on May 4, 1951, in Gary, Indiana, Jackie was the oldest of the Jackson brothers. The first one Joe Jackson put in front of a microphone. The first one to learn the choreography that would later define an entire era of American pop music. By the time he was a teenager, Jackie had a tenor voice that could cut straight through a room, and he used it as co-lead singer of the Jackson 5, trading verses with a kid brother who would go on to become the most famous entertainer on the planet. Think about that position for a second. Jackie wasn't a backup singer. He wasn't the drummer nobody could name. He was right there, center stage, one of the two voices carrying I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save. He danced every step Michael danced. He toured every city Michael toured. For a stretch of years in the late 60s and early 70s, Jackie Jackson was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most visible young performers in America. And then the gravity of the group started to shift. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a single moment you could point to on a calendar. It was more like watching a spotlight slowly narrow, inch by inch, until it settled almost entirely on one person. Michael's voice, his stage presence, his uncanny ability to turn a dance move into a cultural event, all of it pulled focus in a way that no one, including his own brothers, could really compete with. That's not a knock on Jackie. It's just what happened when you were standing next to a once-in-a-generation talent. By the time the group evolved into the Jacksons in the mid-1970s, Jackie was still there, writing, performing, holding the group together through label changes and lineup shifts. The move from Motown to Epic in 1975 wasn't just a business decision, it was a full reinvention. And Jackie was one of the brothers pushing to be treated as songwriters and musicians in their own right, not just a vocal group singing whatever Motown staff writers handed them. He co-wrote Blame It on The Boogie. He co-wrote and performed on Can You Feel It, a soaring, string-drenched anthem that still gets played at basketball arenas and stadium tours nearly 50 years later. These aren't small footnotes. These are real, lasting contributions to the sound of American music, written and performed by a man most casual fans couldn't pick out of a lineup today. But contributions like that rarely get remembered as Jackie's work. They get remembered as a Jackson song, folded into the mythology of the group as a whole, or worse, quietly attributed to whichever brother happened to be the most famous at the time the song gets replayed in someone's head. And when your last name is Jackson, and your little brother is Michael Jackson, that erasure happens fast, and it happens quietly, and eventually you either fight it or you make peace with it. Jackie made peace with it. But making peace with something isn't the same as forgetting it happened, and understanding that distinction is the key to understanding almost everything Jackie Jackson has done in the 5 decades since. Here's an uncomfortable truth about being related to the most famous entertainer who ever lived. Everything you do gets measured against something that was never really measurable in the first place. Jackie released a self-titled solo album in 1973, right in the middle of the Jackson 5's imperial phase. It's a solid record, R&B and soul with real craftsmanship behind it. But it came out the same era that Michael was becoming Michael, and it simply didn't have the commercial runway his brother's solo work did. 16 years later, Jackie tried again with Be the One in 1989, at a moment when Michael was riding the tail end of the biggest album run in music history and Janet had just detonated her own career with Rhythm Nation. Jackie's record came and went, not because it was bad, because the shadow it was released into was simply too large for almost anyone to be seen inside of. This is the part of the Jackson story that rarely gets told with any real sympathy. We talk about Michael's genius, and we should. It was real. It was historic. It changed the trajectory of global pop culture. But genius that big has a gravitational pull. It bends the careers of everyone standing near it. Jermaine's solo career, LaToya's, Randy's, Marlon's, all of them exist in some kind of orbit around Michael, whether they wanted that or not. Jackie's is no different. It's a strange kind of grief, actually, when you think about it, grieving a career that never got to exist on its own terms. While the person responsible for that is someone you love, someone you grew up sharing a bedroom with, someone whose success you were, by every account, genuinely proud of. There's no villain in that story. There's just an impossible scale of fame that swallowed the context around it, including 4 other brothers who had talent, ambition, and real commercial success by any normal standard, just not by the standard Michael set. Being merely successful next to someone who redefined what success even meant is its own quiet kind of hard. Compare that to what happened to some of his siblings. Jermaine spent years publicly wrestling with his place in Michael's shadow, at times through interviews that read as barely disguised resentment. LaToya's solo career became inseparable from tabloid spectacle. Randy's post-fame years were marked by legal disputes and public family conflict. None of that is meant as judgment. Everyone processes that kind of pressure differently, and the Jackson family has been under a level of public scrutiny that almost no other family in entertainment history has faced. But it does make Jackie's path the outlier. While some of his siblings were, understandably, fighting to be seen, Jackie appears to have quietly stopped needing to be. What makes Jackie's story distinct is what he did once he understood that gravity wasn't going away. He didn't spend the next 4 decades trying to outshout it. He didn't chase reinvention through reality television or public feuds or tell all interviews positioning himself against his siblings. If you go looking for a Jackie Jackson scandal, you will mostly come up empty. No headline grabbing lawsuits against his own family. No decades-long public feud captured in a dozen magazine covers. No reality show where cameras follow him through a messy divorce. That absence is not an accident. It's a decision, repeated over and over, year after year, in a family where nearly every other member has at some point ended up in exactly that kind of story. And there's something almost radical about that in 2026. We live in a media environment that runs on conflict. Algorithms reward the loudest voice in the room. If you want views, you fight in public. If you want headlines, you leak something ugly about a sibling. Jackie Jackson looked at that entire machine and simply declined to feed it. The cost of that decision is exactly what we opened this video with. He became harder to find. But the benefit is something you can't put a price tag on. Decades of relative peace, a marriage to his wife Emily that by all accounts has been stable, and 4 children, Siggy, Brandy, and his twin sons Jalen and River, who have grown up mostly outside the tabloid glare that swallowed some of their cousins. So if Jackie Jackson isn't chasing the spotlight, what has he actually been doing with his time? The answer might surprise you, because it has almost nothing to do with music. In January of 2026, Jackie sat down for an interview and revealed something he says he'd wanted to do since he was a teenager touring the world with his brothers in the 1970s and 80s, build a furniture company. Not a vanity project, not a licensing deal with his name slapped on a factory-made sofa. A real design house called Havenhurst, named after the street in Encino, California, where the Jackson family home once stood. The same property where Michael Jackson perfected the moonwalk and recorded early demos for albums that would eventually become Off the Wall and Thriller. Jackie co-founded Havenhurst with his wife Emily and Dutch designer Robert Milder. And the pitch is genuinely interesting. Sustainable, luxury furniture, built from recovered and recycled materials, designed to look and feel indulgent rather than eco-friendly in the crunchy, compromised sense people usually associate with that word. According to Jackie, the idea came from something painfully relatable. He and Emily were renovating their own home and simply couldn't find sustainable furniture that didn't feel like a downgrade. So, they decided to build the company they wished existed. The brand now has multiple collections, named fittingly after the neighborhoods and roads that shaped Jackie's life. Places like Encino, Calabasas, and Mulholland. There's even a collection named Galapagos, leaning into the sustainability angle that sits at the center of the whole brand's identity. Havenhurst has shown at international design events, including Milan's Design Week, putting a 70-something former pop star in rooms with architects and industrial designers rather than music executives and concert promoters. It's a genuinely unusual pivot, the kind of career move that almost never happens in the music industry, where legacy artists tend to stay inside the entertainment lane for the rest of their lives, licensing their name to whatever adjacent product will take it. Hayvenhurst isn't that. It's not Jackie Jackson Home Collection stamped onto furniture designed and manufactured by someone else. Jackie has described the brand's ethos in terms that sound less like a marketing pitch and more like something personal. The idea that caring about the people you love naturally leads to caring about the world they're going to inherit. That's the kind of language you use when you're building something you actually believe in, not something you're doing because your agent thought it would be good for your public image. Think about what that says. This is a man who could have spent his golden years doing what almost every legacy musician does: nostalgia tours, anniversary reissues, the occasional documentary interview trading on decades-old fame. Instead, he went and built something that has nothing to do with that fame at all, something judged on its own design merits in an entirely different industry. That doesn't mean he's walked away from music. Jackie still performs and tours with the Jacksons, keeping the group's catalog alive for audiences who want to hear "I Want You Back" and "Can You Feel It" the way it was meant to be heard, live, with the people who actually made it. He's also stayed connected to his late brother's musical legacy, working in an advisory capacity connected to projects tied to Michael's estate over the years. He mentors younger artists through his own music venture. None of that has stopped. But the furniture business tells you something the touring schedule doesn't. Jackie Jackson, at this stage of his life, is not trying to relive 1970. He's trying to build something new, something that will outlast him in a completely different way than a Jackson 5 record does. That's not the profile of a man who disappeared. That's the profile of a man who reallocated his energy toward things that actually interested him, once he stopped needing the world's validation to feel like his life had meaning. If you want proof that Jackie Jackson never actually left, look at what happened in Los Angeles this past April. On the 20th, Lionsgate held the Los Angeles premiere of Michael, the long-awaited, long-delayed biopic directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring Jaafar Jackson, Jermaine's son, in the role of his late uncle. It was, by any measure, one of the biggest nights in recent Jackson family history. The film would go on to become the first biographical movie in history to cross $1 billion at the worldwide box office. A genuinely historic achievement for a project that had been delayed, retooled, and second-guessed for years before it ever reached a screen. And Jackie was there, not on the outside looking in, not issuing a statement through a publicist, but actually in the room, alongside Marlon, LaToya, and Jermaine, watching a 20-something newcomer step into the most impossible role in modern film, playing Michael Jackson in front of an audience that includes people who watched the real Michael Jackson grow up. Try to imagine what that night actually felt like from Jackie's seat. This isn't an actor playing a legend he never met. This is Jackie watching his own nephew, a kid he'd known his entire life, physically transform into his little brother. The brother he sang with as a teenager in Gary, Indiana. The brother whose shadow shaped nearly every professional decision Jackie made for the next 5 decades. The brother who died in 2009, far too young, in circumstances that were painful and public in ways no family should have to endure. The film itself had been years in the making, delayed more than once, reworked behind the scenes, and surrounded by exactly the kind of public speculation that tends to follow anything connected to Michael Jackson's name. There were questions about how the film would handle the more complicated, painful chapters of his life. There were questions about whether the family's involvement would shape the story into something too soft, too protective. Those debates played out in entertainment press for months before a single frame reached an actual audience. Through all of it, Jackie stayed largely out of the public arguing. He didn't do a press tour defending the film's choices. He didn't publicly clash with siblings who felt differently about how the story should be told. He waited for the night that actually mattered, and he showed up for it. LaToya told reporters afterward that watching Jaafar on screen was disorienting in the best way, that for a moment, it genuinely felt like watching Michael again. Critics would later be divided on the film itself, some praising its craft while others felt it played it safe with the more complicated parts of Michael's story. But almost every review agreed on one thing: Jaafar's performance was extraordinary. Jackie didn't need to say much that night to make his presence felt. Just being there, visibly, emotionally, physically present for his nephew and for his brother's legacy, did the talking. This is a family that has, at various points, been publicly split over how Michael should be remembered, who should control his image, and what story deserves to be told about him. The fact that Jackie showed up, stood beside his siblings, and supported a project meant to celebrate rather than exploit his brother's memory tells you exactly where his priorities sit. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there because it mattered. There's a particular kind of role that exists in almost every large family, and it rarely comes with a title. It's the role of the person everyone quietly relies on to hold things together when something goes wrong. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the one giving interviews, the one who shows up. In a family that has weathered as much loss and public scrutiny as the Jacksons, the death of Michael in 2009, the guardianship battles that followed, the passing of their mother Catherine's husband Joe, and more recently, the death of their brother Tito, someone has to be that steady presence. By most accounts, that person has long been Jackie. When Tito passed, the tributes from siblings were raw and public, as they should have been. But behind those public statements, the more meaningful work happened privately, family gathering together, sharing memories, leaning on decades of shared history that outsiders will never fully understand. That's not the kind of grief that makes headlines, and it's not supposed to. It's the kind of grief that happens at a kitchen table, not a press conference. That's the pattern with Jackie, over and over again. When the family faces something painful, he doesn't perform his response for an audience. He shows up for the people actually in the room. As the eldest brother, the one who was there before any of them were famous, the one who remembers Gary, Indiana before there was a Motown contract or a Jackson 5 or a global icon named Michael, Jackie occupies a kind of quiet authority in that family that doesn't need a microphone to be felt. It's worth pointing out that this isn't a role that gets celebrated the way public advocacy does. Nobody writes a headline that says man privately supports his family. But ask anyone who's ever lost someone close to them, and they'll tell you, the people who show up quietly, who don't need credit, who are just there, those are usually the ones who matter most when everything else falls apart. There's also something worth noting about what that role costs a person over time. Being the eldest sibling in any family means absorbing a certain amount of responsibility nobody assigns you on paper. You just become the one people call first, the one who remembers what year something happened, the one who smooths things over before an argument becomes a rift. In an ordinary family, that's already a heavy, often invisible job. In a family under constant public observation, where every disagreement risks becoming a magazine headline, that job becomes exponentially harder. Every instinct to protect the family has to compete with a media environment that profits from exposing exactly the things Jackie is trying to protect. And yet, by most accounts from people close to the family, Jackie has managed to do it without turning himself into a martyr about it, and without turning it into content. He's not out there doing interviews about how hard it is to hold the family together. He's just doing it, which, again, is precisely why so few people are talking about him. The job he's been quietly doing for decades is specifically the kind of job that succeeds by being invisible. So let's go back to the question we opened with. Why is nobody talking about Jackie Jackson anymore? Because he made a choice, decades ago, that most people in his position never make. He looked at a media landscape that was going to reward him for chaos, for feuds, for scandal, for airing family business in public, and he chose the opposite. He chose to build a marriage that's lasted. He chose to raise children largely outside the spotlight. He chose to keep performing the music that matters to him without needing it to make headlines. He chose, at an age when most legacy musicians are coasting on nostalgia, to start an entirely new business in an entirely new industry, just because it was something he'd always wanted to try. None of that generates the kind of attention his family's name usually attracts. It was never going to. Peace doesn't trend. Stability doesn't get clipped. A furniture line built on sustainability and craftsmanship doesn't compete for headlines with a public feud or a tell-all documentary. But maybe that's exactly the point. In a family where the world has spent 50 years watching, judging, and consuming every private moment as public content, Jackie Jackson quietly decided that not everything had to be for sale. Not every memory had to be a headline. Not every feeling had to be performed. He was there at the beginning, singing lead before his little brother became the biggest star on earth. He was there in April, standing in a theater, watching that same brother return to the screen through the eyes of a nephew he helped raise. And he's been there in between, in the rooms nobody photographs, doing the quiet work of simply being a brother, a husband, a father, and now, unexpectedly, a furniture designer. Nobody's talking about Jackie Jackson because Jackie Jackson stopped needing them to. And honestly, in a family that's paid such a steep price for fame, that might be the smartest, most quietly radical decision any of them ever made. There's a version of this story where Jackie spends his 70s doing anniversary interviews, trading on 50-year-old footage, showing up on nostalgia panels to talk about a group he was part of when Richard Nixon was president. Nobody would have blamed him for that. It's the well-worn path, and it's the one almost every legacy performer eventually takes. Instead, he's out there co-designing furniture collections, still performing catalog songs he clearly still loves, still showing up for his family at the moments that actually count, and still, apparently, not particularly interested in convincing anyone to pay attention to any of it. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in this story. Not every member of a famous family owes the public a performance of their entire life. Some of them get to just live it. If this is the first time you've really thought about Jackie Jackson as more than one of the brothers, you're not the only one, and that's exactly why we made this video. We're building out the full picture of this family here on Jackson Rewind. One sibling, one story, one hidden chapter at a time. If you want the next one the moment it drops, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more of this family's story that's never really been told properly. Let us know in the comments, did you know about Havenhurst before today? And who should we cover next? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.